Sure.
How to get it out. It's on.
Oh, you want it
out?
on?
Yeah.
You got it. There you go.
Oh, perfect.
Most things you just force it. All right. Welcome, everyone. Are we live on the web? Hello, everyone out there in the Ethernet land. It's my pleasure to introduce Pam Schreiber, who is the Executive Director of Housing and Food Services at University of Washington. She's going to talk with us a little bit about pursuing doctorate and helping us figure out how we decide. I'm very excited to introduce her. Thank you.
So thanks everybody for being here, and thanks for those who are tuning in. So I hope that we can have a good meeting today, and I'd like to keep it relatively informal. I appreciate y'all sitting in this area so that I can make eye contact with those of you who are here, and I will make eye contact with our visitors as often as I can as well. So I appreciate your interest in this topic, and I want to sort of make some introductory remarks, set our context for today. So the first thing that I wanted to mention to you is, in the name of full disclosure, I have an EDD from the University of Georgia, and we can talk a little bit later about an EDD versus a PhD and what that means and why, if you're interested. So I'll let you decide if that's one of the questions that you want to pursue. But I did want to share that with you because I think that I will, in doing this session, my interest in doing it was to both call on my own experience, but also to tap into some of the other areas that I had particular interest in, namely professional development. And I think so much of the process that we're going to talk about today is really the exact same process that I would advise that we use when we're making decisions about any type of professional development experience that we think may be beneficial and important to us. But in addition to that, and I'm going to reference this several times today, that as a part of preparing for this program, I tapped into my network of colleagues who always bail me out when I need help. And I wrote to two different groups of colleagues. One group of people have earned a terminal degree, another group of folks have not at this point in time earned a terminal degree. But everyone in that group is in what I would consider a high-level leadership role. So they hold the title of director or higher. And I've captured their narrative for you and have included it in the materials that were either linked or are available to you today. And I'm going to reference those comments throughout the program this morning because I think the advice that they shared really reflects kind of this parts and pieces of this process that we're going to talk about today. My colleagues were so generous with sharing their insights and perspectives that I almost thought I could provide that handout to you and walk away because they really have said so many great helpful things in their sharing of their insights. So when you have the opportunity to spend more time with those narratives, I really encourage you to read through those. So I'm going to highlight some of those today. Okay. Point the clicker in the right direction. There we go. So a couple other items in regard to our introduction. I do appreciate that you're joining me, and I just want to say that I'm going to try to get through the material fairly quickly and have time for questions. But my email address is at the end of the program, so at any point in time, you want to continue this conversation and you want to ask about the specific situation you're in or talk things through, please feel free, if you think I can be of help to you, to contact me. Because really, I think, and it might be me, it might be anybody else that you trust and know and think can help ask the tough questions for you. So our relationship continues beyond today. Okay. Our focus today is we're gonna focus on making this decision. How do I decide we're going to talk at one point in time about some strategies for how to successfully complete a terminal degree. But the only reason I'm going there, because first of all, there's a ton of information available for people, how to be successful, how to get through the process, how to navigate the dissertation, etc. But I'm highlighting with you today a couple of those strategies, primarily because I think they reveal some things you should consider in making the decision in the first place. Okay? There's a list of resources that I've provided you, and in particular, there's a really great webinar in that resource list. I'm talking with 3 people at 3 different stages in their doctoral program. So as an example, that webinar is full of a lot of great advice that should you choose to pursue the doctorate, you can find out all these great strategies for upping the likelihood that you will be successful. Okay? We're going to focus today, like I said, on the decision-making process and highlight those strategies only because I think they help in that decision. And then we're going to move through things pretty quickly here. So we are going to start the program today with a reflection exercise. And sometimes this is like, oh, I don't want to write, I don't want to stop, let's just keep talking, right? But I'm a big believer that it's really important that we sort of get our minds and our brains into the topic at hand. And when we have an opportunity to personalize some of our thinking, then the rest of the program tends to be more meaningful. Okay? So we're going to start there. And so we're actually going to do something that you probably shouldn't do when you have folks, when you're streaming, and that is be quiet for 5 minutes. But what I want you to do is I do want you to take that reflection worksheet that you've been provided, and I want you to just contemplate the questions and make some notes that reflect your thinking. Now here's the deal. You will not be asked to share with anyone anything that you thought or wrote down. So this is not going to be a sharing exercise. This is for you and for your benefit. So if you want to write things like, I hate pantsuit, it's really ugly, you can write that, okay? So let's start now and take about 5 minutes of personal quiet time to reflect on these questions. Yeah, 1 minute out. Okay, let's come back together. On the one hand, 5 minutes of quiet time seems like a lot. On the other hand, taking 5 minutes to think about a really serious life decision is not long at all. And I think therein lies sort of, the first part of this process, and that is, my recommendation is that you need to be willing to invest some time and energy thinking about this decision before you make it. Because even if you are at a point where you're fairly certain you would like to pursue a degree, there's a number of very key decisions along the way that you're going to have to make. And that if you have a good understanding of these things behind me on the slide, understanding yourself, etc., the rest of those decisions are going to come much easier. So I would recommend that you do spend some time thinking about where you are in your career, who you are as a professional and as a person, and what your goals are. And even if you are not at a point where you can define, particularly clear or distinct goals, generally speaking, ask yourself those questions. On my retirement day, what do I want to be able to say? Life was life. And that will give you lots of will reveal a lot about what your goals are to begin the process. Now, we could do a session just on this whole exercise of how do you sort of take some time to revisit who you are and what you want. We don't have the luxury of that today, and so my answer is a selfless plug for a chapter that I wrote for a book for NWACUHO. So if you're not familiar with the campus housing management series, the last book in the series, chapter 10, is on professional development. And I co-authored that chapter with Josh Goldman, who was a staff member at NWACUHO at the time that we wrote the chapter. And what I think is valuable in this particular resource is it focuses more on this idea of how do you make decisions in regard to professional development. How do you go through a values clarification process? What are some of the things you need to think about and consider when you ask yourself that question? What kind of a person am I? What kind of a professional am I? What kind of life do I want to have? And so I just think it's particularly the first part of the chapter offers you some great guidance in how you might go through that process. We do so much of this with the people that we work with, particularly our undergraduate students, and yet we sometimes forget that we need to put ourselves through this process and re-ask a lot of the same questions that maybe we went through when we were an undergrad. This is a significantly important part of this process. And as we go through some of the rest of the program today, I think it will become very obvious. This is not a one-size-fits-all decision. And so it is very, very important that you cater to your particular needs and desires as you move forward. So it's extremely important that you go through that process. again, we could spend a lot of time on that, and we need to move on, but I don't want to, suggest that this first bullet here is not very important and probably where you should spend the majority of your time. For example, in the chapter, one of the things that we talk about is actually asking yourself about, the places that you want to live, even for a short term. Is it a community that has values that you can fit with? There is nothing worse than trying to complete a very, very difficult task and you are completely miserable with where you're living and what life is like around you. So things that we might not think are part of this decision are in fact very much a part of not only making the decision, but should you choose to pursue a degree, a big part of your success. So moving on, a second very key part of this decision is if you're going to pursue a degree, do it for a reason. The reason itself doesn't matter. Just know what that reason is and own it. Quick little story. I worked for a point in time at the University of Florida, and I was essentially an area coordinator, although my title was something different. And I worked, our vice president at the time was a gentleman named Art Sandine. Some of you may recognize his name. It's sort of the Larry Roper of the Southeast, okay? It just is fabulous to listen to. Larry was so great today. So, but Art had been in the field for a very, very long time. He had been president of NASA. He had written many publications. He's that kind of a guy, right? Like Larry. And so every time I would run into Art on campus, he would say, "Pam, when are you going to grad school? Pam, when are you going to grad school? When are you going for your doctorate?" Right? Now, imagine standing up and telling Larry Roper, "No, sir, I'm not going to do that." So that was sort of my experience. Is I had to look Art in the face and say, "No, sir, I'm not ready to do that." At that point in my career, I really had no aspirations to continue my education. I loved my work. I was happy with it. I could see future, in terms of other things that I wanted to do. And so my point here is have a reason. And in that case, my reason could not be because Art Sandine thought it was a good idea. So as much as I respected him and as much as I would want to make him proud, that was not a good enough reason. So consider for yourself, what is my reason? Another part of this decision that I think is very critical is there's more than one right answer. And herein, again, lies the reason to really do a good self-evaluation about what you want out of your work life and what you want out of your non-work life. And when you identify what those goals are, ask yourself, how many different ways can I get there? And if, as you are asking those questions, you find there are many pathways to the goals that you are after, that gives you lots and lots of choices, right? Which could make this decision easier, because if other choices present themselves, then that can become your pathway. If many of those pathways include earning a terminal degree, then that may make this decision easier, because you will begin to see that most of those pathways are through a graduate program. So it's very important to think about what those goals are and then ask yourself that question, how many pathways are there to this goal? And again, I think that's where the narratives that I have shared with you today are really important, because you will read that people have taken many, many different pathways to the same end point, and that is to be a leader of an organization, a housing organization. So there are many options, but you have to, again, depending on your goals, determine how many of those pathways are available. And then finally, a huge part of this decision is recognizing that life is three-dimensional. And making decisions such as this one does not require elimination of any other aspect of your life, but it definitely requires compromise. There is no question that it involves compromise. When you know, look at making this decision, it is unrealistic to say that everything that's happening right now in your life is somehow either going to go away, be put aside, or no longer be relevant. Okay? Life is three-dimensional. And this is a long-term investment. And so chances are the way your life looks today, if you become engaged in a doctoral program, life goes on while you're in that program, and new issues and new dimensions of your life emerge. Again, you'll see in some of the narratives, there's one that is just incredibly thought-provoking. It's a female director, and she talks about beginning this process. She did earn her terminal degree, but she talked about starting this process when she was not partnered. And by the time she finished, she was partnered, had purchased and renovated a home, had experienced some very significant tragic life experiences through the process. And those are things that she in no way could have guessed or hoped would have happened to her. And so they couldn't have been included in her initial decision. So recognizing that, you know, life is three-dimensional, and when you consider including this has to become part of it. All right, so I want to move on and talk, as I promised, about a couple of strategies. So let's presume that you decide, yes, I think I want to go forward with this. And so I'm going to begin the process of moving into this program. I've mentioned this earlier, but we'll repeat it. There's lots and lots of great advice about how to be successful once you enter the program. What I've done here is picked out 4 things that I think actually not only contribute to success if you choose to pursue a degree, but by considering these things might actually help you make the decision in the first place. Okay, so here's what I mean by that. So the first thing is the importance of evaluating the programs, both the content and the structure, based on your particular needs. This is a very engaged, complicated process. And as I mentioned earlier, if you, for example, are unhappy with your living situation, it can be really challenging. Equally true, maybe even more so true, is if you're unhappy with your program, it can be the death of you. And so it's very important to look for a program that meets your needs, that fits your value system, that helps you accommodate that three-dimensional life that you live. Okay? Sometimes people will say, well, you have to go with the best program. Well, that may mean moving you and or your family far away to a place that, you know, is not would be a good place or a good fit for you. So how does that make that the best program then, if that is the compromise you need to make? So the strategy of finding a good fit gets us to think about, what if I can't find that fit where I am right now, given the three-dimensional life I'm living? That may suggest that this is not the time to pursue this particular initiative, right? And so it's really important to look around and decide what options are available to you. There may be another point in your career where you take a different position. You move you and your family to that area that happens to have that program, and suddenly the fit appears a little more appropriate. Okay, so very important to think about. The next thing, and for your handouts and for the people who are with us online, there's a interesting mistake. So your handout says, be a hare. I meant to say, be a tortoise. And it was so funny because I thought, I knew exactly what I meant when I wrote it. So cross off the word hare and write the word tortoise. And this, of course, is in reference to the famous fable, the tortoise and the hare, right? And so this particular strategy is about taking this process, breaking it down into consumable chunks, right? It is about being persistent. It is about pursuing different aspects of the degree with the same amount of energy, avoiding fits and starts, but going slow and keep moving, okay? Really best results in terms of in completing the degree comes when you keep a very steady pace going forward. If you are unable to make that kind of a commitment, then that may be a reason to make the decision to not do this. So if, for example, you are planning or having some life event that would require you to stop out of the program for a while or put it aside, there's a very high risk of you stopping altogether. Now, the good news is that a lot of life events that used to cause us to stop out are a bit, I don't want to say easier, but there's more support to keep going. So having a family might be one of those examples. But there's certainly other types of life events that would not. Aging parents might be one of those examples. Thinking about, I think we've got to move mom out to live with us, right? And so suddenly, that is could be a very challenging situation and could prevent you from staying the course and keeping persistent. So food for thought. Another strategy, interestingly, is have a plan, but stay flexible. Things are going to change in your life and in the program while you are in it. And they will require you to be adaptable. So it's possible that a faculty member you are working with takes a different position. And that can really be challenging if you have a very focused plan to move forward at a certain pace and get certain things accomplished. So once again, if you don't have that kind of flexibility in your life, this may not be a good time to make this decision. Right? So if there are other things going on in your life and you say, I couldn't risk doing this, or I couldn't be flexible on doing that, then you have to recognize that could cause some real difficulties as you get started. And then finally, as I like to say, 100% is 100%. And what I mean by that is, if you choose to enter into a doctoral program, the time and energy that will take needs to come from some place. You're not going to get more time in the day. You're not necessarily going to get more of other things. So this notion of, well, you're going to give it 110%, you have 100% to give. And that's as far as it goes. I heard a great quote the other day, and if I get it wrong, somebody maybe can help me, but it's something like, if you can't give 100%, if you don't have 100%, give 100% of what you've got. How about that? And the idea here is that even if you become a full-time student, so you resign your position, because life is three-dimensional, you're not going to be able to give 100% of everything to being a student. Many people do not, in fact, resign their position and keep working, which means that whatever time and energy you have to allocate to this has to come from somewhere. And if you're not in a position now to take anything from the other dimensions of your life, then this may be a good time to not make the decision to move forward. Okay? So again, by looking at some of the strategies for being successful, they enlighten some of the things that we would want to think about in making the initial decision. Okay? So I want to just talk a little bit about career implications. And I want to talk about the feedback that I collected from some of our colleagues. I'm going to keep this brief because I want to be able to take questions. Again, there's some fantastic narratives, and I've given you verbatim what our colleagues shared with me. So I did absolutely no editing, including I didn't correct if there was a missing word, or I didn't take out information that could be identifiable. People willingly shared with me those narratives, and so I left everything in there. It is not a scientific, well-developed research, a study. So it is there for your benefit, almost as if you have just sat down with these folks around the table and had this conversation. Okay, so the benefit, I think, is simply in the stories that they have shared. Interestingly to me, again, there's a group that have earned a terminal degree and a group that have not. And it is so interesting to me how the same issues appear in both sets of narratives. So for example, someone who has earned a terminal degree talked about, when asked the question, what would you have done differently, said, I believe this was very difficult on my family, and I didn't know that or appreciate it at the time. And if I had to do it over again, I would handle that very differently. Someone who opted not to pursue the degree at least up to this point, does serve as an executive director of Housing and Residence Life, said, I didn't do it because I wanted to spend my discretionary time with my son. And that was priority, and I was not going to take any of that 100%, right, and take that away from what I was allocating to my family. So the family theme, is interestingly on both sides of that. Some people, one other respondent who had earned a terminal degree, did it because of his family. He said, I wanted to be able to be as successful as possible and earn as much money as I could for my family. So you can begin to see some of the evidence of how personal values play into this decision, right? All of those people value family. All of those folks value family. The decision they made around that value, though, was different. In one case, two cases, someone pursued the degree, and then another, they opted not to. A couple other things that came out, and again, this really was similar in both sets of narratives. People talked about the importance of learning in general. In pursuing a terminal degree is a formal learning exercise, but there are many other formal and informal learning exercises that informed their work, that kept them challenged, and led to career promotions. So it was interesting how both sets of respondents talked about it's all about learning. And so whether you're engaged in this project, this type of a project or another, commit yourself to learning, and that comes in many forms. Two other takeaways, these are sort of generalized takeaways that people were very clear about. The first is similar to what I just mentioned. If you read, write, research, and serve, the credential may not matter. Okay? And so a lot of the respondents talked about the work that they've done with associations, that they challenged themselves to write, that they got engaged in research projects, even though that was not a part of the required curriculum program, but that it helped them, of course, to develop as a professional. Another respondent said, however, that because they did earn the credential, they were able to partner with faculty and others and conduct research that was published, etc. So in that person's value set, they wanted to do research, but wanted to be able to have the option to partner with faculty and pursue it in that way. But there's a great case, I think some of the respondents make a great case that it is not absolutely essential to be able to do any of those things. The exception to that, however, may be teaching. And it depends on the circumstances and what is required to teach at either the institution you work at or a nearby institution. One of the respondents who did not pursue the terminal degree does teach, and he teaches in the subject matter of his master's degree. Another respondent who has earned a terminal degree said, I absolutely would never have gotten an adjunct faculty position had it not been for the degree. And because I teach graduate students in our field, not only do I feel like I'm contributing, but I get back, I have to stay current on the literature, and so that is a way for me to keep up to date. So those are some of the takeaways from the narrative, and I hope, again, that you have some time to spend reading those and sort of pulling out of those narratives what is of value to you. I think, though, as you read those, I encourage you to look for the evidence of defining personal values, understanding priorities, clearly understanding the goals at hand. And you will hear in those stories evidence that people went through that process and then reached a decision that they all seem very, very comfortable with. Okay, so I want to save quite a bit of time for questions and conversation. So the first thing I want you to do is just look back at your notes that you made on the reflection sheet, just to kind of remind yourself of some of the things that you were thinking as we started our conversation today. So just take a minute and 1 minute quietly, see if there's anything you would add to the notes that you have made thus far. So let's see what questions you have, what things you want to focus on. We have a really solid about 13 to 15 minutes. And if we have any questions from our folks online, we'll take those as well. So please.
You mentioned earlier that you have your EDD, and so curious, how do you decide EDD, PhD, JD? Sometimes MBA gets one on there. Is that a terminal degree? Is it a master's? Those sort of questions.
Great question. The question had to do with the EDD versus PhD versus JD versus MBA. Right? So we'll start big and go small, right? So the big question is, again, what are you trying to accomplish? And because MBA, JD, and depending on what you would do a PhD or an EDD in, those are very different curriculum, very different disciplines, and they will prepare you in very different ways. So the first question really is, am I needing a terminal degree just to say I have one, or is what I'm going to study, important, and therefore I want to check in with my goals and my career aspirations and select the program that will best meet my needs, in serving the various roles that I'm looking for. I think that's really important. I will tell you there are many days that I wish I had an MBA because I'm completely social science all the way in education, and that's it's always a steep learning curve for me. So that's where I have to commit my own professional development. And back to the idea of, we never stop learning regardless of if you have a terminal degree. I mean, I have to fill the gaps that terminal degree didn't provide. Now, back to the other part of your question. So the differences between an EDD and a PhD vary depending on the program. There are some EDD programs that do not require original research in a dissertation. The program that I went through was almost identical to the PhD program. The biggest difference is, or the only difference was that in order to earn the PhD, you needed to have written a journal article and have it published. So I chose the EDD because I could get through a little faster. And then I took my dissertation afterward, turned it into a Chelsea Bass chapter, and had it published. So, I don't care. I mean, it didn't matter, but I wanted to be finished because I wanted to move on. And so I did the publishing later. You have to look very carefully when you're considering a program as to what it's offering. And what difference does that make for you? In my case, I wanted the opportunity and the responsibility to do original research because I wanted to apply that to my work. So I wanted to be guided through that process as a part of my program. Great question. Thank you. Other question? Please.
Career status and age as you pursue it with the upcoming, everyone's getting a master's degree in higher education. Young ones are coming up after the more veterans in the position. What does that look like?
Great question. So the question pertains to having a master's degree is fairly common in our fields, and so how perhaps do you stay competitive and create distinctions between you and someone else who has the same credential? Right? Great question. Well, you can certainly get more credentials. You certainly can do that, and you'll see in the narratives that some of our colleagues talked about, that in some cases they wanted to assure that if they were competing for a position, they could bring that to the table. One respondent said that they believed they were passed over on one occasion because they didn't have a terminal degree, but others said it has never hindered me because I have done what? Read, write, research, serve. And I've done all those things, and so I've proven that I can be successful and I can function. So I think that the question is, how do you distinguish yourself from other candidates? A credential is one way of doing that. Interestingly, one of the respondents said that unfortunately, some of the people that he's worked with terminal degrees were highly disappointing. And others that he worked with were motivating, excited, engaged, smart, etc. So I think, we all know that, earning the credential means you've done something, but it doesn't mean you can do anything. Okay? So I think that's how you distinguish yourself. Okay? Any questions from online? No? Okay? Great. Yes, please.
Is there anywhere that breaks down the different programs and what they offer?
Great question. Is there a resource that breaks down different programs and what's involved? I do not know. Does anyone here know the answer to that? Has anyone looked or found a resource?
So NASPA has a graduate school directory that you can search for like master's and PhD and EDD programs, and they kind of have updated like what that program offers and
Okay.
like on the NASPA.
Okay, so NASPA has a directory of programs, maybe a good place to start. I think it is a good place to start when you're doing sort of that high-level evaluation. If you are seriously considering selecting a program, find somebody who's in it and find somebody who survived getting through it. I mean that really with all the love and luster. It's really important to talk to the students and ask about their experience, because what is on the website, what is published in publications, what is put out there may or may not reflect the actual student experience. Again, when you identify your personal values, ask those questions. Is this program family friendly? Does this program allow you to customize it in any way, programmatically? Does this program provide flexibility in this way or that, right? So depending on what those values are that you have charted, ask those questions about that program. I think one of the greatest myths, and I would say most horrendous things that's part of this program is that people think if they were treated horribly and they were hazed and it was awful, that somehow that degree is then worth more in the end. And that is, I won't say what I'm really thinking because we're online with friends, but it's baloney. That's baloney. It doesn't need to be like that. In fact, it should be the exact opposite of that. One of the reasons I selected the adult ed program is because there were 3 options at the school I was working at. And I went and I interviewed the faculty. And I selected adult ed because they said, we walk the talk. We teach adult education and therefore we function as if you are an adult learner. I said, oh, does that mean I can customize this program? Yes. Does that mean I can have flexibility on this? Yes. And they said, but it doesn't mean you aren't going to work your butt off, right? Because we take a lot of pride in our degree, but it's not going to be easy in terms of the rigor of the curriculum, but we are not going to make you jump through hoops unnecessarily. And I said, you are for me. And that's how I chose the program over a higher ed program, because it worked for me and all those dimensions of my life fit. Thank you, great question. Other questions or comments, please, if you'd like to share experience. I'll share the mic with you. Please, no.
Yes, my question relates a little bit in terms of, is it frowned upon if you were like an assistant director or an RD that's, in the field and looking to move up, you already have your master's, you get a doctorate if you're not in a director position?
So the question is, can you do it too early? Is it frowned upon if you are not in a director's role and you want to seek it? I don't think it makes a difference. I think what makes a difference is what's happening at your life at that point in time. And if there's a good fit, if there's an opportunity, if your values are aligned and you have the opportunity to do it and you know that's what you want at some point in your career, then do it. Right? One of the things that we are a very experiential-based field. And again, that's why people who don't have a terminal degree are very able to be very successful and become directors and executive directors and AVPs, etc. Is because what we do, what we can, how we perform is so important, right? And we use it, thankfully, as a gauge of someone's success. So just having the credential doesn't therefore mean that you could then step into, a certain type of role, because experience is highly valued. One of the pieces of advice that I give folks in that situation is, don't tell me what degree you have, tell me what you learned getting it, and how that matters to me as your potential future employer, right? So learning to take that degree and the process that you went through and translate that into the needs of the position. One of the reasons I wanted to be able to do original research is I wanted to be able to take that forward, because assessment was becoming, at that point in time, was becoming a huge emphasis in our field. And I wanted to be able to say, I understand how to do this. I've done original research. I know what it means to write a research question, to analyze data, etc. And so even though I hadn't had any experience doing research, as a housing professional, I had it in my program. I was able to translate that experience and say, why could I apply this and how could I apply it? Right. And probably have time for one more question. If you have one. Okay, please.
So the question that I have is, so let's say currently right now I am thinking about it, but not necessarily now, but in the future. Do you have any advice or like tips of maybe things that I can possibly do now to help prepare me for that decision?
Great question. So the question was, probably not do it now, probably will do it in the future. What can I do now to prepare for that? So I think a couple of things, just real quickly. First of all, I think you should now incorporate that into all of your professional development planning and all of your career planning. So if you know that it is in your future, perhaps the next time you look for a job or you look to change responsibilities, that now becomes a critical component of that decision. I will only go where there is a program that I can participate in. Okay, so now it may, create parameters for your next job search. The other thing I think is back to the read, write, research, and serve. Get those things under your belt now, not only because it will help inform your study and your scholarship, but it will create networks and a support people that you can rely on. So those would be two suggestions that I have. Really appreciate you being here with me today. I hope this was helpful. This is a very individual, contemplative process. So I hope that maybe by asking some key questions I've gotten you started on your thinking. Please use the materials, and if I can help you in any way, I would be happy to connect personally with each of you. So thank you very much, and thanks to our friends who joined us online.